Hi, I'm Sophia. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones you need protection from. For years, I thought the bruises on my soul were invisible, that the fear I carried was mine alone to bear. I was wrong. Technology has a way of revealing truths we never intended to share, and sometimes that revelation becomes the key to everything changing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the suburbs of Cedar Falls, our house on Maple Street looked like every other house on the block. White picket fence, manicured lawn, flower boxes under the windows that my mother, Patricia, tended to religiously every morning. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. My father, Marcus, was a respected bank manager who wore pressed suits and smiled at neighbors. My mother was a part-time librarian who baked cookies for school fundraisers. I was their only daughter, the straight-A student who played violin and volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. But houses, I learned, are just facades. What happens behind closed doors is where the real story lives. The first time I remember my father hitting me, I was 12 years old. I had accidentally knocked over his coffee mug while reaching for the sugar bowl during breakfast. The ceramic shattered against the kitchen tile, and the sound seemed to trigger something primal in him. His hand came across my face so fast I didn't see it coming. The sting was immediate, but what hurt more was the silence that followed. My mother didn't gasp, didn't cry out, didn't even look up from her morning paper. She simply said, "Sophia, clean that up before you're late for school." That was my first lesson in the unspoken rules of our house. Don't make noise, don't make messes, and never, ever talk about what happens inside these walls. As I grew older, the incidents became more frequent, but somehow more invisible. A shove when I didn't move fast enough, a slap when my grades weren't perfect enough, a grip on my arm that left fingerprint bruises I learned to hide with long sleeves. Each time, my mother's response was the same: silence. Clean it up, move on, stay quiet. By the time I turned 16, I had become an expert at reading the weather patterns of my father's moods. I could tell by the way his key turned in the lock whether it had been a good day or a bad one at the bank. I could predict by the set of his shoulders whether dinner conversation would be safe or treacherous. I developed an internal early warning system that kept me hypervigilant, always ready to duck, always ready to disappear. My friends at school saw me as the quiet, studious girl who kept to herself. Teachers praised my discipline and focus, never knowing that my perfectionism was born from fear rather than ambition. I couldn't afford to give my father any reason to be disappointed in me, because disappointment, in our house, had consequences that left marks. The worst part wasn't even the physical pain, though that was real and constant. The worst part was the way my mother's complicity made me question my own reality. After each incident, she would find me in my room and deliver the same speech in her soft, measured librarian voice. "Your father works very hard, Sophia. He's under a lot of pressure. We need to be understanding. We need to be supportive. What happens in our family stays in our family." She said it like she was teaching me a valuable life lesson, like keeping quiet about abuse was some kind of virtue. She said it like the bruises on my arms were a small price to pay for maintaining the illusion of our perfect family. She said it like my pain was less important than his reputation. I began to wonder if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too everything. Maybe other families dealt with this too, and I was just weak for letting it affect me. My mother's calm acceptance of the situation made me doubt my own experiences, made me wonder if what I was living through was even real. The isolation was suffocating. I couldn't tell my friends because how do you explain that your honor roll certificates hang on the same refrigerator as the bruises on your body? How do you describe living in a house where love and violence exist in the same space, delivered by the same hands? How do you make someone understand that the man who drives you to violin lessons and brags about your achievements to his colleagues is the same man who leaves you cowering in corners? School became my sanctuary, the only place where I felt safe from the unpredictable storms of my father's temper. I threw myself into my studies with a desperation that my teachers mistook for passion. I spent long hours in the library, partly because I genuinely loved learning, but mostly because it meant less time at home, less time walking on eggshells, less time being a target. My violin became another escape. In the music room, with the bow in my hands and the strings responding to my touch, I could pour all the emotions I wasn't allowed to express at home into something beautiful. The melancholy pieces spoke to my soul, while the dramatic ones gave voice to the anger I couldn't speak aloud. My music teacher, Mrs. Chen, often commented on the raw emotion in my playing, never knowing that every note was a cry for help that no one was hearing. As I approached my senior year of high school, the violence at home seemed to escalate. My father's career pressures were mounting, and he was drinking more frequently. The combination made him unpredictable and dangerous. A forgotten chore could result in being shoved against a wall. A perceived tone in my voice could earn me a slap that left my ear ringing for hours. A B grade on a test, even when the class average was a C, could trigger a rage that left me wondering if this time would be the time he went too far. Through it all, my mother maintained her position as the keeper of secrets. She developed an elaborate system of explanations. Sophia is so clumsy, she would tell neighbors who noticed a bandage or a bruise. She's always walking into doors, falling downstairs. She gets so absorbed in her books, she doesn't watch where she's going. She said it with such conviction that sometimes even I believed it was true. But the truth has a way of demanding to be heard, even when everyone around you is committed to silence. And sometimes the truth finds a way to speak through the most unexpected channels.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It was the fall of my senior year when my father decided we needed a new security system. There had been a series of break-ins in our neighborhood, and his paranoia about protecting our perfect home led him to install cameras around the property. He researched extensively, wanting the best system money could buy, something that would capture every angle, record everything in high definition, store footage for months. The irony wasn't lost on me even then. The man who demanded absolute privacy about what happened inside our house was installing devices that would record everything that happened outside it. But like so many things in our family, the contradiction went unspoken, unexamined. The installation took place on a Saturday in early October. The technician, a friendly man in his 30s named Jake, spent hours setting up cameras at every entrance and exit: front door, back door, side gate, garage. Each camera was equipped with motion sensors, night vision, and audio recording capabilities. The main monitoring unit was installed in my father's home office, giving him complete control over what was recorded and what was saved. As Jake explained the system's features to my parents, I listened from the kitchen where I was supposed to be doing homework. The cameras would activate automatically when they detected motion. They would record continuously for 30 minutes after the last movement was detected. The footage would be stored on a local hard drive as well as uploaded to a cloud server. Everything would be time-stamped and date-stamped. The audio quality was so clear, Jake boasted, that you could hear conversations from 15 feet away. My father was delighted with the technology. He spent the rest of the weekend testing different features, adjusting angles, making sure every inch of our property's perimeter was covered. He showed off the smartphone app that let him monitor the feeds remotely, the email alerts that would notify him of any unusual activity. He was particularly pleased with the front door camera, which had the clearest picture and the most sensitive audio recording. What my father didn't anticipate was how often our family dramas would spill out onto the front porch, right into the camera's unflinching view. The first incident happened 3 weeks after installation. I had stayed late at school for violin practice and came home to find my father already in one of his moods. Dinner was cold, he said. I was inconsiderate and selfish. Didn't I understand that he worked all day to provide for this family, and the least I could do was be home in time for dinner? The argument started in the kitchen, but quickly moved toward the front of the house. He was following me, his voice getting louder, his movements more aggressive. I was trying to get to my room, to escape, but he blocked my path to the stairs. When I tried to go around him, he grabbed my arm and spun me toward the front door. "Maybe you don't appreciate what you have here," he snarled, his grip tightening on my wrist. "Maybe you'd rather live somewhere else." He yanked open the front door and shoved me outside. I stumbled onto the porch, catching myself against the railing. He followed me out, his face red with rage, and that's when his hand connected with my cheek in a slap that echoed off the houses across the street. "Don't you ever disrespect me like that again," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I don't care how old you think you are. This is my house, and you'll follow my rules." I stood there, my cheek burning, tears streaming down my face, completely unaware that every word, every gesture, every moment of abuse had been captured in perfect high definition by the camera mounted just above the front door. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of practiced calm. "Come inside, both of you," she said quietly. "The neighbors will hear." That night, as I lay in bed with an ice pack pressed to my swollen cheek, I had no idea that the evidence of what happened to me was sitting on a hard drive in my father's office, automatically uploaded to a cloud server, time-stamped and dated, waiting to be discovered. The pattern continued throughout that winter. Arguments that started inside would somehow migrate to the front porch, usually with my father pushing me outside as a way of asserting his control. The cold air would hit my face, often already stinging from his hand, and I would find myself standing on our front steps while he towered over me, delivering his lessons about respect and obedience. Each incident was recorded. Each slap, each shove, each moment of terrorization was captured by the very security system he had installed to protect his reputation. Meanwhile, my mother's mantra remained unchanged. What happens in our family stays in our family. She seemed to believe that if we just didn't talk about it, if we just pretended everything was normal, then somehow it would become true. She perfected the art of explaining away my injuries, of deflecting concerned questions from teachers and friends. She became complicit not just in the abuse itself, but in the elaborate cover-up that followed each incident. But secrets, I was beginning to learn, have a way of revealing themselves, especially when they're recorded in high definition and stored in multiple locations. Truth, it turns out, doesn't respect the boundaries we try to build around it. As winter turned to spring and my 18th birthday approached, I began to feel a shift in myself. Maybe it was the approaching milestone of adulthood, or maybe it was just the accumulation of years of pain finally reaching a breaking point. I started to question my mother's philosophy of silence. I started to wonder if keeping quiet was really protecting anyone, or if it was just protecting my father's ability to continue hurting me. I began to pay attention to the world beyond our house, to the conversations happening in my classes about domestic violence, to the resources posted on bulletin boards that I had previously ignored. I started to understand that what was happening to me had a name, that there were laws against it, that there were people who would believe me and help me. But I also knew that speaking up would mean destroying the carefully constructed facade that my family had built. It would mean admitting that our perfect house on Maple Street was a lie, that my father's respected position in the community was built on a foundation of violence and fear. It would mean betraying my mother's most fundamental rule about keeping family secrets. I was caught between two impossible choices: continue living in fear and silence, or speak up and face the consequences of shattering our family's illusion of perfection. What I didn't know was that the choice would soon be taken out of my hands entirely. It was a humid Tuesday evening in late April when everything changed. I had been accepted to 3 different colleges and was trying to decide which one to attend. My father had opinions about my choice, of course, and they didn't align with mine. He wanted me to stay local, to live at home and commute to the community college. I wanted to go to State University, 4 hours away, where I had been accepted into their prestigious music program. The discussion started calmly at dinner, but like so many conversations in our house, it quickly spiraled into something darker. My father couldn't understand why I would want to leave home, why I would want to waste money on a fancy music program when I could get a perfectly good education right here in Cedar Falls. He saw my desire for independence as a personal rejection, a sign of ingratitude for everything he had provided. "You think you're too good for this family," he said, his voice taking on that dangerous edge I knew so well. "You think because you got good grades, you can just walk away from the people who sacrificed for you." I tried to explain that I wasn't rejecting the family, just choosing my own path. I tried to tell him that the music program at State was exactly what I needed to pursue my dreams. But my words only seemed to fuel his anger. The argument moved from the dining room to the living room to the front hall, following the familiar pattern of so many fights before. I was trying to get upstairs to my room, trying to escape, when he blocked my path and grabbed my shoulders. "You're not going anywhere," he said, shaking me hard enough to make my teeth rattle. "You'll go to school here, and you'll live in this house, and you'll show some gratitude for everything I've done for you." When I tried to pull away, he tightened his grip and pushed me toward the front door. My mother appeared at the top of the stairs, but instead of intervening, she delivered her usual line, "Keep your voices down, the whole neighborhood will hear." That's when something inside me snapped. Years of fear and silence and accumulated pain suddenly crystallized into a moment of clarity. I looked up at my mother, standing safely at the top of the stairs, and I said the words I had been holding back for years. "Let them hear," I said, loudly enough for anyone within a block radius to understand. "Let them all hear what kind of man you're married to." My father's reaction was swift and brutal. He yanked open the front door and shoved me out onto the porch so hard that I fell to my knees on the concrete. As I scrambled to get up, his hand came down across my face in a slap that split my lip and sent me reeling backward into the porch railing. "You ungrateful little bitch," he snarled, advancing toward me. "I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me?" I could taste blood in my mouth as I looked up at him, this man who was supposed to love and protect me, who was supposed to be my father. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in my understanding of who he was and who I was in relation to him. "You've given me bruises and fear," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You've given me years of walking on eggshells and pretending everything is fine. You've given me a mother who thinks keeping quiet about abuse is some kind of virtue." His second slap was harder than the first, snapping my head to the side and making my ears ring. But this time, I didn't cry. This time, I looked directly into the camera mounted above our front door, the camera that had been faithfully recording every incident for months, and I spoke directly to its lens. "My name is Sophia Martinez," I said clearly, blood running from my lip. "I live at 1247 Maple Street in Cedar Falls, and my father has been hitting me for years. My mother knows and tells me to keep quiet about it. This is what our family really looks like." My father followed my gaze up to the camera, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Real, immediate fear as he realized what had just happened, what had been happening all along. The very security system he had installed to protect his reputation had been documenting its destruction, one incident at a time. The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before. This wasn't the silence of secrets and shame. This was the silence of truth finally being spoken, of reality finally being acknowledged, of a facade finally crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes darting between me, my father, and the camera that had captured it all. For the first time in years, she was speechless, unable to offer her usual explanations and excuses. That night, as I sat in my room with ice on my swollen face and a plan forming in my mind, I realized that the little red light on that camera had been my salvation all along. Every incident it had recorded was evidence. Every slap, every shove, every moment of abuse was documented with date and timestamps that no one could dispute. The truth had been accumulating in digital files, waiting for someone to discover it, waiting for someone to be brave enough to use it. And now, finally, someone was. The next morning brought an unusual quiet to our house. My father left for work earlier than normal, avoiding eye contact as he grabbed his coffee and briefcase. My mother moved through her morning routine like a ghost, her usual chatter about the weather and neighborhood gossip replaced by tense silence. Neither of them mentioned what had happened on the front porch, as if ignoring it might make it disappear. But I knew better now. I knew that somewhere in the digital files of our security system, the truth was preserved in perfect clarity. The question was what to do with that knowledge. I had called in sick to school, claiming a stomach bug, though the real sickness was the churning anxiety in my gut about what came next. My split lip was swollen and obvious, and I wasn't ready to face the questions that would inevitably come from teachers and classmates. Instead, I spent the morning researching, learning everything I could about digital evidence, domestic violence laws, and my rights as a minor in our state. What I discovered both empowered and terrified me. The recordings would indeed be considered evidence if I chose to report the abuse. The audio and video quality would make it impossible for my father to claim the incidents never happened. But I also learned that filing a report would set in motion a series of events that I couldn't control or stop once they began. By afternoon, I had made a decision.
I needed to see the footage for myself to understand exactly what evidence existed. My father's home office was normally off limits, but with both parents out of the house, I had an opportunity I might not get again. The door to his office was unlocked, which surprised me until I realized that he probably never imagined I would have the courage to invade his private space. The room smelled like his cologne and old leather, filled with the trappings of his professional success. Certificates on the walls, awards from the bank, photos of him shaking hands with local politicians and business leaders. It was a shrine to the public image he had worked so hard to cultivate. The security system monitor sat on his desk like an accusation, its screen dark but ready to reveal everything. I had watched him access it enough times to know the basic password, a combination of our house number and his birth year that he used for everything. The system booted up easily, presenting me with a menu of camera feeds and recorded footage. My hands trembled as I navigated to the front door camera files. Months of recordings were stored in neat digital folders, organized by date and time. I scrolled through the timeline, looking for the incidents I remembered most clearly. The first one from October, when he had slapped me for coming home late from violin practice. The one from December, when a disagreement about my grades had escalated into violence. The one from February, when he had shoved me so hard I had fallen down the front steps. Each file played like a horror movie, starring myself and my family. The audio was crystal clear, picking up every word, every impact, every sob. The video quality was so sharp that I could see the exact moment when his hand connected with my face, could watch my own expression change from fear to resignation to pain. But what struck me most wasn't the violence itself, which I had lived through and remembered viscerally. It was seeing my mother in these recordings, standing in doorways or watching from windows, her face a mask of practiced indifference. In one particularly brutal clip from January, she actually walked past us mid-incident to retrieve the newspaper from the driveway, stepping around my crumpled form on the porch like I was an inconvenient obstacle. The most recent recording, from the night before, was the most damning. My declaration to the camera was clear and unmistakable. My father's violence was documented in excruciating detail.
But it was the look on his face when he realized what the camera had captured that told the real story. The sudden shift from rage to panic, the way his eyes darted from the lens to me and back again. The moment he understood that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. As I sat in his chair, watching these digital testimonies to years of abuse, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. Vindication, because here was proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't exaggerating, wasn't making it up. Sorrow, because seeing it all laid out so starkly made me realize how much of my childhood had been stolen by his violence and my mother's complicity. I copied the most significant files to a USB drive I found in his desk drawer, my heart pounding with each transfer. These digital files represented more than evidence. They were my ticket to freedom, my proof that the perfect family facade was a lie, my weapon against years of gaslighting and manipulation. But I also knew that accessing them would come with consequences. My father would know someone had been in his office, had accessed his files. The system logged every entry, every file accessed, every action taken. By the time he got home from work, he would have a complete record of my digital trespass. The thought of his reaction when he discovered what I had done sent ice through my veins. But for the first time in years, the fear was tempered by something else: power. I had evidence now. I had proof. I had a way to make people believe me. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching local resources for domestic violence victims. I found the number for the county's crisis hotline, the address of the Family Services Office, the names of attorneys who specialized in helping abuse survivors. I read about restraining orders and emergency shelters and victim advocacy programs. Each piece of information felt like a lifeline, a way out of the prison my family had built around me. But I also knew that using any of these resources would mean crossing a line I could never uncross. It would mean admitting publicly that our family was broken, that my father was a criminal, that my mother was complicit in my abuse. When my parents returned home that evening, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut.
My father went straight to his office, and I heard the familiar sounds of him checking the security system. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. He had discovered my digital footprints, knew that I had accessed the recordings. Dinner was a surreal affair. We sat around the same table where so many arguments had begun, eating my mother's meatloaf and pretending everything was normal. But underneath the surface pleasantries, we were all acutely aware that the balance of power in our house had shifted fundamentally. My father's questions started innocently enough. How was I feeling? Had I stayed home all day? Did I get some rest? But his eyes never left my face, and I could see him searching for signs of what I might have done, what I might have discovered. My mother, meanwhile, seemed to be holding her breath, waiting for an explosion that felt inevitable. She kept glancing between my father and me, her fork moving mechanically from plate to mouth, her usual dinner conversation nowhere to be found. It was when I excused myself to go upstairs that my father finally confronted me directly. He followed me into the hallway, his voice low and controlled, but unmistakably threatening. "I know you were in my office today, Sophia," he said, blocking my path to the stairs. "I know you accessed files that don't belong to you." I looked at him steadily, feeling calmer than I had any right to feel, given the danger I was in. "I accessed files that show exactly who you really are," I replied, "files that document every time you've put your hands on me in violence." His face darkened, but I could see the fear underneath the anger. "Those files are private property. You had no right to access them." "And you had no right to hit me," I shot back, "but you did it anyway, and now there's proof." The standoff stretched between us, two people who finally understood exactly where they stood with each other. No more pretending, no more facades, no more lies about what our family really was. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice carefully modulated. It was a question I had been preparing for all afternoon. "I want you to leave me alone. I want to go to State University without any interference from you. I want the violence to stop, permanently. And in exchange? In exchange, I don't take what I found to the police." It was a bluff, at least partially. I wasn't entirely sure I was ready to involve law enforcement, wasn't sure I was prepared for the chaos that would follow. But the threat was real enough to get his attention. My mother appeared at the kitchen doorway, her face pale and stricken. She had clearly been listening to our conversation, and for the first time, she was hearing the explicit truth about what had been happening in our house. "Sophia, honey," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "let's not do anything rash. Let's talk about this as a family." I turned to look at her, this woman who had spent years teaching me that silence was a virtue, that keeping family secrets was more important than protecting her own child from violence. "We are talking about it, Mom," I said. "We're finally talking about it honestly, instead of pretending it doesn't exist." "But if we involve outsiders," she continued, "it could ruin everything. Your father's career, our reputation in the community, your chances for college scholarships." It was the same argument she had been making for years, the same priority system that put appearance over safety, reputation over reality. But this time, I was done listening. "His career built on a foundation of family violence doesn't deserve protection," I said firmly. "Our reputation based on lies doesn't deserve preservation, and any scholarship that depends on maintaining this facade isn't worth having." The conversation ended there, with all three of us understanding that we had crossed into uncharted territory. The old rules no longer applied. The old silence was broken. The old pretenses were exposed.
That night, I lay in bed clutching the USB drive like a talisman, knowing that it contained the power to change everything. The recordings were more than evidence. They were verification of my reality, proof that I wasn't imagining or exaggerating the violence that had shaped my life. But I also knew that having evidence and using evidence were two very different things. The files on that drive could set me free, but they could also destroy what remained of my family, could expose us all to scrutiny and judgment and consequences none of us were prepared for. The next few days passed in a strange suspension of normal life. My father was careful around me, his usual volatility replaced by a watchful tension. My mother moved through the house like she was walking on glass, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile peace we had managed to construct. I returned to school, explaining my split lip as a result of walking into a door in the dark, another lie in the endless catalog of explanations our family had created for my injuries. But something had changed in me fundamentally. The fear that had governed my life for so long was still there, but it was balanced now by a sense of agency I had never experienced before. My best friend, Maya, noticed the change immediately. We were sitting in the library during lunch when she finally asked directly about what she had been observing for weeks. "Sophie, I know something's going on at home," she said quietly, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. "You've been different lately, more distant, more guarded, and that cut on your lip doesn't look like you walked into a door." I looked at my friend, this girl who had been my anchor through so many storms, and realized that I was tired of lying to her, tired of protecting my family's secrets at the cost of my own isolation. "What would you do," I asked carefully, "if you had proof that someone in your family was hurting you, but using that proof would destroy everything you thought you knew about your life?" Maya's eyes widened, and I could see her mind racing through the implications of my question. She was smart enough to read between the lines, loyal enough not to push for details I wasn't ready to share. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes destroying the lie is the only way to build something true." Her words stayed with me through the rest of that day and into the evening. As I sat at my desk, supposedly working on college application essays, but actually staring at the USB drive that contained my family's digital secrets, I realized that Maya was right. Everything I thought I knew about my life was built on a foundation of lies and silence and violence. Maybe it was time to let that foundation crumble so something real could be built in its place. The decision, when it finally came, wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet and considered, and born from a deep understanding that I deserved better than what I had been accepting for so long. I opened my laptop and began researching family law attorneys in our area, looking for someone who specialized in cases involving minors and domestic violence. I read reviews and credentials and case histories, searching for someone who would understand the complexity of my situation and help me navigate the legal system. Dr. Rachel Morrison's name appeared repeatedly in my searches. She was a family law attorney who had spent 15 years representing abuse survivors, with a particular focus on helping young people escape violent homes. Her office was downtown, close to the courthouse, and her website contained testimonials from clients who praised her compassion and effectiveness. I called her office the next morning, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. The receptionist was kind and professional, scheduling me for a consultation that afternoon. When she asked about the nature of my case, I simply said it involved a minor seeking help with a domestic violence situation. Leaving school early required another lie, another story about a doctor's appointment that my mother had supposedly scheduled. I was becoming exhausted by the constant deception, tired of living in a world where truth was dangerous and lies were survival tools. Dr. Morrison's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, painted a soothing blue with a well-maintained garden in front. The waiting room was comfortable and private, designed to make vulnerable clients feel safe and welcomed. When Dr. Morrison called me back to her office, I was struck immediately by her presence. She was a woman in her early 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes, dressed professionally but not intimidatingly. Her office was filled with books and plants and soft lighting, creating an atmosphere that encouraged honesty. "Tell me what's brought you here today, Sophia," she said gently, settling into her chair across from me. And for the first time in my life, I told the complete truth. I described years of violence and fear, my mother's complicity and silence, the security cameras that had been documenting everything. I showed her the USB drive and explained how I accessed the files, what they contained, what they proved. Dr. Morrison listened without judgment, taking notes occasionally, but mostly just allowing me to speak without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I had shared. "First," she said finally, "I want you to know that what you've experienced is not your fault.
Nothing you did or didn't do caused your father to be violent. Nothing you could have done differently would have prevented it. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were so kind. After years of being told implicitly that I was somehow responsible for my father's behavior, hearing someone say clearly that I wasn't was overwhelming. Second, she continued, the evidence you've gathered is extraordinarily compelling. Video and audio recordings with clear timestamps showing repeated incidents of abuse would be very difficult for anyone to dispute or explain away. But, I asked, sensing there was more, but using this evidence will have consequences that extend far beyond your immediate situation. Your father could face criminal charges. Your family will likely face intense scrutiny from law enforcement and social services. Your mother could potentially be charged with failure to protect a minor from abuse. The weight of those potential consequences settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had been so focused on documenting the abuse and proving my reality that I hadn't fully considered how many lives would be changed by bringing that evidence into the light. What are my options? I asked. Dr. Morrison outlined several possible paths forward. I could file for emancipation, seeking legal independence from my parents while remaining in school. I could report the abuse to law enforcement and let the criminal justice system handle the case. I could seek a restraining order that would legally prohibit my father from contacting or threatening me, or I could attempt to negotiate some kind of agreement with my family that would ensure my safety without involving the courts. Each option came with its own risks and benefits, its own potential for success or failure. None of them were simple or guaranteed to work exactly as intended. I need time to think, I told her. Of course, she replied.
This is one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. Take all the time you need. But Sophia, I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me that if the violence escalates, if you feel like you're in immediate danger, you'll call me or call 911 or call someone who can help you. Don't try to handle an emergency situation on your own. I promised, and she gave me her card with her office number, her cell phone, and her email address. She also gave me information about local crisis resources and safe houses, just in case I needed them. As I walked back to my car, my mind was spinning with possibilities and fears and hopes I had never allowed myself to have before. For the first time in years, I could see a path forward that didn't involve accepting violence as a normal part of my life. But I also understood that choosing that path would require more courage than I had ever needed before. It would mean standing up not just to my father, but to my entire family's way of dealing with problems. It would mean choosing my own safety and well-being over their comfort and reputation. That evening, as I sat in my room reviewing the information Dr. Morrison had given me, I realized that the little girl who had learned to clean up broken coffee mugs and keep quiet about bruises was gone. In her place was a young woman who understood that she had choices, who knew that she deserved better, who had the evidence and the support she needed to change her life fundamentally. The question was whether I was brave enough to use them. The answer came sooner than I expected, in the form of another violent confrontation that would force my hand and make the decision for me. Because sometimes, when you're living with a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to escape means waiting too long. Sometimes, survival means acting before you feel ready, means choosing the uncertain future over the certain danger of staying where you are. And sometimes, the very technology that was supposed to protect your abuser becomes the tool of your liberation. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in May, 3 weeks before my high school graduation. I had been accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, and the acceptance letter was sitting on the kitchen counter when my father came home from what had clearly been a difficult day at the bank. I should have recognized the warning signs. His tie was loosened, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and there was a particular set to his jaw that I had learned to fear over the years. But I was distracted by my college acceptance, excited about the future that was finally within reach, and I let my guard down at exactly the wrong moment. The argument started over something trivial, the way these things always did. I had left my violin case in the living room instead of taking it directly upstairs. Such a small thing, but in our house, small things had a way of becoming explosive. "How many times do I have to tell you to put your things away immediately when you come home?" he demanded, gesturing at the case like it was evidence of my fundamental character flaws. "I was just going to move it after I got some water," I replied, already moving toward the case to relocate it. "Don't make excuses," he snapped. "Just do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it." I picked up the violin case and started toward the stairs, hoping to escape before the situation escalated further. But as I passed the kitchen counter, he noticed the college acceptance letter I had been reading earlier. "What's this?" he asked, snatching up the paper. My heart sank as I watched him read the letter, his expression growing darker with each line. The acceptance was for the music program at State University, 4 hours away from Cedar Falls, with a scholarship that would cover most of my tuition costs. "You applied to this school without discussing it with me?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I told you I was applying to several schools," I replied carefully. "This one has an excellent music program." "I told you that you would be attending community college and living at home," he said, crumpling the letter in his fist. "I told you that we couldn't afford to send you away to some fancy university to study something as useless as music." The scholarship information was right there in the letter he had just destroyed, clearly stating that my costs would be minimal. But facts had never been particularly relevant to my father's arguments. What mattered to him was control, and my acceptance to a distant university represented a threat to that control. "Dad, please, just look at the financial information," I said. "The scholarship covers almost everything. It wouldn't cost you anything." "It's not about the money," he snarled, throwing the crumpled letter at my feet. "It's about respect. It's about family loyalty. It's about not abandoning the people who raised you the minute you think you have other options." I could feel the familiar tension building in the air, the electricity that preceded his explosions of violence. My mother had appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the raised voices, but her expression told me she had no intention of intervening. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said, bending to pick up the destroyed letter. "I'm just trying to get an education and build a future for myself." That's when he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the exact spot where he had left bruises the week before. "You ungrateful little bitch," he hissed. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By planning to run away the first chance you get?" I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, and I could feel the bruises forming under his fingers. "Let go of me," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Instead of releasing me, he started dragging me toward the front door, following the pattern that had become so familiar over the years. Out onto the front porch, where the neighbors couldn't see clearly, but the security camera could record everything. "Maybe you need a reminder of who is in charge here," he said, shoving me outside hard enough that I stumbled and fell to my knees on the concrete. As I struggled to get back to my feet, he followed me out, his hand already raised. But this time, something was different. This time, I didn't cower or try to protect myself or beg him to stop. This time, I looked directly into the camera above our front door and spoke clearly and deliberately. "This is Sophia Martinez at 1247 Maple Street," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. "It's May 15th, and my father is about to hit me again because I got accepted to college." The effect of my words was immediate and dramatic. My father's hand froze in midair as he realized what I was doing, what I was saying, who I was saying it to. The camera that had been his pride and joy, his symbol of security and control, had become my witness and my weapon. "You think that camera is going to save you?" he asked, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "I think that camera has been saving me for months," I replied, getting to my feet and facing him directly. "Every time you've hit me out here, it's been recorded. Every threat, every slap, every moment of abuse has been documented with perfect clarity." I could see the panic starting to creep into his eyes as he realized the full implications of what I was saying. Months of recorded evidence, digital files that couldn't be explained away or denied, timestamps and audio that would make it impossible for him to claim the incidents never happened. "What do you want?" he asked, the same question he had posed weeks earlier, but with a different tone now, less threatening, more desperate. I want you to understand that I'm not the helpless little girl you've been terrorizing for years, I said, feeling a strength I had never experienced before. I'm 18 years old, I'm about to graduate from high school, and I have evidence of every time you've put your hands on me in violence. My mother had joined us on the front porch, her face pale and stricken. For once, she seemed to understand that her usual strategy of denial and silence wasn't going to work. Sophia, honey, let's go inside and talk about this rationally, she said, her voice shaking. I'm done talking, I replied, not taking my eyes off my father. I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done protecting your reputation at the cost of my safety. That's when I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the number I had memorized weeks earlier. Dr. Morrison's emergency line, the one she had told me to call if I ever felt like I was in immediate danger. Dr. Morrison, this is Sophia Martinez. I need help. The conversation was brief but decisive. Dr. Morrison told me to stay on the line, to remain in a public area where neighbors could see me, and to call 911 if the situation became more dangerous. She was leaving her office immediately and would be at my house within 30 minutes. As I hung up the phone, my father seemed to deflate, as if he finally understood that his ability to control the situation through intimidation and violence had come to an end. You have no idea what you've just done, he said, but his voice was hollow, defeated. I know exactly what I've done, I replied. I've chosen my safety over your comfort. I've chosen truth over your lies. I've chosen my future over your control. Dr. Morrison arrived exactly when she had promised, pulling into our driveway in a silver sedan and walking up to our front porch with the confident stride of someone who had handled situations like this many times before. She was accompanied by a social worker named Janet Fields, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Sophia, Dr. Morrison said, reaching me first, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I showed her the fresh bruises on my arm where my father had grabbed me, the scrapes on my knees from being shoved to the concrete. She documented everything with photos, speaking quietly into a digital recorder as she worked. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, Janet Fields said, addressing my parents with professional courtesy but unmistakable authority. I'm with the county's Child Protective Services office. We need to discuss some serious allegations that have been brought to our attention. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. Sitting in our living room, surrounded by the familiar furniture and family photos that had always made our house look so normal from the outside, we finally talked honestly about what had been happening behind our closed doors. Dr. Morrison presented the evidence methodically, screenshots from the security camera footage showing clear instances of violence, audio clips that captured my father's threats and my mother's instructions to keep quiet, digital files with timestamps that created an undeniable timeline of abuse. My father tried initially to claim that the incidents were taken out of context, that I was exaggerating normal family discipline, but the recordings spoke for themselves. There was no context that could justify a grown man repeatedly striking his teenage daughter. There was no explanation that could make his behavior seem reasonable or appropriate. My mother's defense was different, but equally hollow. She claimed that she had been trying to protect the family, that she believed keeping things quiet was the best way to help everyone heal and move forward. But Janet Fields asked pointed questions about her responsibility as a parent to protect her child from harm, and my mother had no good answers. The meeting lasted for hours, with phone calls made to various agencies and officials. A police report was filed. Arrangements were made for me to stay with Dr. Morrison's family until more permanent housing could be arranged. Plans were put in place for me to finish my final weeks of high school without having to return to my family's house. As the sun set and the official business concluded, I found myself packing a suitcase in my childhood bedroom, gathering the belongings I would need for an uncertain but hopeful future. The room looked the same as it always had, but everything felt different now that I was leaving it behind. My father knocked on my doorframe as I was folding clothes into my suitcase. He looked older than I had ever seen him, diminished by the events of the day and the consequences that were still unfolding. I never meant for things to go this far, he said quietly. I looked at him, this man who had shaped so much of my life through fear and violence, and realized that I felt sorry for him. Not sorry enough to stay, not sorry enough to pretend that what he had done was acceptable, but sorry for the choices he had made that had led us to this moment.
I know you didn't, I replied. But they did go this far, and now we all have to live with the consequences. He nodded, seeming to understand that there was nothing more to say, no apology that could undo years of damage, no explanation that could justify what had happened. My mother was harder to face. She stood in the kitchen, crying quietly as I prepared to leave the house where I had spent my entire life. Her tears felt like an accusation, as if my decision to seek help was somehow a betrayal of her love and sacrifice.
I did the best I could, she said as I hugged her goodbye. I know you think you did, I replied, but your best wasn't good enough to keep me safe. Dr. Morrison drove me to her house that night, a comfortable colonial in a neighborhood across town. Her family welcomed me with warmth and kindness, offering me a guest room and treating me like a visiting relative rather than a refugee from domestic violence. Over the following weeks, as my father faced criminal charges and my mother attended court-mandated counseling sessions, I finished my senior year of high school and prepared for college. The scholarship to State University was still valid, and Dr. Morrison helped me navigate the financial aid process to ensure I could attend without any support from my family. Graduation day was bittersweet. I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, but my parents weren't in the audience to watch. Dr. Morrison and her family were there, cheering as loudly as any biological family could have, but their presence couldn't entirely fill the absence of the people who should have been celebrating this milestone with me. The legal proceedings dragged on through the summer. My father ultimately pled guilty to multiple counts of domestic violence and was sentenced to probation, anger management classes, and community service. The judge also issued a restraining order that prohibited him from contacting me directly, though he was allowed to communicate through Dr. Morrison if necessary. My mother was not charged criminally, but she was required to attend extensive counseling and parenting classes. The social worker's report noted that while she had not physically abused me, her failure to protect me from known danger constituted a form of neglect that could have resulted in more serious consequences. As August approached and my departure for college drew near, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed since that night when I first spoke directly to the security camera. The scared, isolated girl who had lived in fear for so many years was gone, replaced by a young woman who understood her own worth and refused to accept abuse as normal. The recordings that had documented my father's violence became the foundation for a new understanding of my own reality. They proved that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated the abuse, that my memories were accurate, that my pain was real and justified. They gave me the evidence I needed to convince others of what I had been experiencing, and they gave me the courage to demand something better for myself. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that healing from trauma is a long process, one that doesn't end when the immediate danger is removed. She connected me with a therapist who specialized in working with abuse survivors, and she helped me develop strategies for managing the anxiety and hypervigilance that had become second nature during my years of living in fear. On the day I left for college, I drove past my childhood home one last time. The security cameras were still mounted above the front door, still recording everything that happened on that porch where so much of my pain had played out. But now those cameras felt like allies rather than threats, witnesses to my strength rather than just my suffering. State University welcomed me with open arms, and I threw myself into my studies with the passion I had always felt for music but had never been free to fully explore. My professors were impressed by my dedication and skill, but I think what they really responded to was the authenticity I brought to my performance. Years of suppressing emotion had given way to a willingness to feel everything deeply and express it through my art. I made friends easily, drawn to other students who shared my love of music and my commitment to academic excellence. For the first time in my life, I was able to form relationships based on trust and mutual respect, rather than fear and manipulation. I learned what it felt like to disagree with someone without expecting violence, to make mistakes without anticipating punishment, to express my opinions without being afraid of the consequences. The restraining order meant that my father couldn't attend my college performances or visit me on campus, but I found that I didn't miss his presence. The absence of his judgment and criticism allowed me to discover who I really was as a musician and as a person, freed from the constant pressure to be perfect in order to avoid his anger. My relationship with my mother remained complicated. She sent cards and letters occasionally, updates about her therapy progress, and expressions of regret for the ways she had failed to protect me. I responded politely but distantly,
Not ready to forgive, but not willing to cut off all contact either. Healing, I learned, doesn't always mean reconciliation, and choosing my own well-being sometimes means maintaining boundaries that disappoint other people. 2 years into college, I received a call from Dr. Morrison with news that my father had violated his probation by drinking alcohol, which was prohibited under the terms of his sentence. He was facing jail time, and my mother was struggling to manage their finances and maintain their house on her own. Part of me felt a perverse satisfaction that his choices were finally catching up with him in ways he couldn't control or manipulate. But mostly, I just felt sad for the family we could have been if he had chosen differently, if my mother had been braver, if all of us had understood earlier that love and violence cannot coexist in the same relationship. I graduated from State University with highest honors. My senior recital attended by Dr. Morrison and her family, my therapist, and several close friends who had become my chosen family. As I played my final piece, a complex composition that required both technical skill and emotional depth, I thought about the girl who had spoken to that security camera so many years earlier. She had been brave in that moment, braver than she knew, but she had no idea how much strength she actually possessed. She couldn't have imagined that the evidence she was creating would lead not just to her escape from an abusive situation, but to a complete transformation of her understanding of what she deserved from life. Today, I work as a music therapist, helping other survivors of trauma use artistic expression as a tool for healing. I often think about the power of bearing witness, of creating records that can't be denied or dismissed. The security camera that documented my abuse taught me that truth has a way of preserving itself, of waiting patiently until someone is brave enough to bring it into the light. Sometimes clients ask me how I found the courage to speak up, how I managed to overcome years of conditioning that taught me to stay silent about family violence. I tell them about that night on the front porch when I finally understood that the very technology meant to protect my abuser could become the tool of my liberation. The little red light on that camera represented more than just surveillance. It represented the possibility that someone, somewhere, would eventually see the truth of what was happening to me. It represented hope that justice could be found, that violence could be stopped, that a different kind of life was possible. My story isn't unique, unfortunately. Thousands of young people are living in homes where violence is normalized, where secrecy is enforced, where speaking up feels impossible. But technology is changing the landscape of domestic violence, creating new opportunities for documentation and evidence gathering that didn't exist in previous generations. If you're living in a situation like the one I escaped, please know that you deserve better. You deserve safety, respect, and love that doesn't come with conditions or consequences. You deserve adults who protect you rather than harm you, who believe you rather than silence you, who prioritize your well-being over their reputation. The evidence is out there, waiting to be discovered. The help is available, waiting to be accessed. The courage is inside you, waiting to be found. And somewhere, someone is ready to believe you, to support you, to help you build the life you deserve. The camera captured it all, but more importantly, it captured the moment when I decided I was worth saving. That moment changed everything, and it can change everything for you too. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.